Welcome back to the Sales Cadence Podcast. This is the podcast for everyone in sales, because everyone is in sales. We're all selling something. My name is Matt Sykes. I'm your host. I'm the author of the book Sales Glue and Converted. And if, like me, you're as passionate about helping people make truly epic buying decisions so that more people buy what you sell, great news. You're in the right place. One of the first questions that I'll ask to any new client is I always ask them about, can they describe how a buyer buys from them? And 99 times out of 100 when I ask that question, I always get the same reply, which is, yeah, we get an inbound inquiry, or they engage and accept an outbound request, and we have a meeting. And then that meeting turns into a sales conversation. And so I'm always fascinated when people start there, because what they're effectively doing is they're describing a part of the sales process, or what this episode really is about is the buyer's journey, the buyer's process. They're describing a part of that process, that journey, which is almost 65% along the way. So almost it's more than halfway along the way is where they believe the buyer starts to engage with them. And the frightening thing to some extent is that so many people think that way and act that way, and that's sometimes why their sales are just not where they want them to be. And it's usually because they've misunderstood how the buyer goes about buying from people like them. And so this episode really is a short one, and it's really just about redefining and just sharing with you just exactly how a buyer goes about engaging with an organization like yours. And the great thing about this is because we are both buyers ourselves, we can really relate to the steps that I'm going to sort of walk you through. And there's nothing new here. This is all typical, normal stock standard information that you should be able to find out there in the marketplace. So let's just go through what typically happens. So if I use the example of I'm driving down the road and then all of a sudden on my dashboard of my car, an engine light comes on, immediately that gets my attention. And I suddenly realize that something's just triggered my engagement to do something. And actually, if I think about the situation of driving a car and that engine light comes on as I'm driving, it's probably not going to be a particularly pleasurable experience. It's going to be, oh, what's that? Why has that just come on? And so the very first thing that will happen to a buyer is there'll be something that was sometimes referred to as an impact trigger. Something's happened which has stopped them in their tracks from a thinking perspective and gone, why has that happened? And that's really the starting point of the buyer's journey. Something's happened. What do I do next? And so if you think about the world of, let's use me as the example, so sales training and coaching. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it's the third month in a row where the sales director is reporting a sales figure lower than the target they set themselves. And so they're about to go into month 4, and the gap between where they should be, or where they said they'd be, to where they actually are, is starting to creep further and further apart. That would be what I would sometimes refer to as the sort of thing that would trigger a need to do something. So step 1 really is this current thing that's happened, this impact trigger. Step 2 on the buyer's journey then is we as buyers immediately go into self-diagnosis mode. And so go, like, engine lights just come on the dashboard. I wonder why that's happened. Oh, I know what it is. When I had the MOT done last month, the mechanic did say that we had a slight issue with the fan belt and we should do something about changing that. Now, I'm not a car mechanic and I don't even know if fan belts are things anymore, because they probably aren't in the world of cars. I've no idea. But my point is, as the driver of the vehicle, having seen the engine light come on, which has triggered my need to think about, well, what do I do next? I'm immediately going to go and try and decide what to do next. And that's sort of step 2 really in the buyer's journey, is something's happened. How do I fix it? How do I self-diagnose why this problem's happening? And so bring it back to my world. Sales director then goes, right, there's a reason why we're going 3 months in a row and possibly the 4th. It's because our sales team aren't performing at the level that I believe we should be. I can measure my team individually by their conversion rate and their the quantity of deals in the pipeline and where those pipeline deal stages are and how long each deal stage is. I can do all sorts of measurement metrics to self-diagnose why I believe we've missed target 3 months in a row. And if you think about your own situation, you'll be able to self-diagnose on behalf of your buyer why they believe they know the answer to their own problem. Now, we can argue whether or not they have got it right or not. That can come later. But at the moment, because there is an absolute avalanche of information out there at our fingertips, we know that we can go and self-diagnose and effectively self-reflect on why something's happened. Once we've done that as buyers, once we've diagnosed why the lights come on or we're missing sales, we can then put ourselves into the world of the future. And we can say to ourselves, is this problem big enough for me to want to do something about it? And so sort of step 3 really is thinking forward, thinking ahead and saying, if I don't do something, can I get away with it? And so if the engine lights come on and it's the fan belt that's the problem, if I decide not to change the fan belt, is that going to cause me a bigger problem down the line? And the likelihood is, well, it sounds like quite an important part of the car. I've got no idea, by the way, folks. So any mechanics listening, feel free to email me and tell me I'm wrong. But if I don't change the fan belt, do I then have a bigger problem where the engine blows up? Okay. And really by thinking into the future, I'm asking myself is, could I get caught out if I don't do anything? And therefore, do I need to do something? And so bringing it back to the world of sales team are underperforming. I've measured each of them individually. Some are performing slightly worse than others. And that's where I am at the moment. But if I don't do something to improve their performance and therefore improve our sales, what is the future? Let's call it a future impact trigger. What's going to happen in the future that's going to catch me out? Well, I could well find myself having to report to the board 2 consecutive quarters in a row where we're missing target. And then that starts to look a little bit ropey for me as the sales director. And if I turn up to that meeting and I haven't at least given it some thought and come up with some kind of remedial solution, some kind of plan moving forward, then not only am I reporting bad news, I'm also reporting the fact that I've not done anything about trying to mitigate that bad news from continuing. I haven't come up with a solution. So step 3 really is to sort of buyers then think into the future, is this problem worth me doing anything about? And so step 4 then is, if it is big enough of a problem to do something about, if I don't want the engine on my car to blow up, then I've got to find some way of fixing it. And so step 4 is a self-diagnosis process where we decide to solve the problem that we diagnosed earlier. And so in the case of the car, it's right, I need to go and book an appointment at the garage, go and see my mechanic friend again and say, got a bit of a problem with the fan belt, engine light keeps coming on, don't want the engine to blow up in the future. I need to book in for you to go and fix the car for me. Perfect example of how I can self-diagnose that fix just by thinking about what I'm going to do next. And so in the world of, sadly, our underperforming sales team, our head of sales or our sales director who's about to go and see the board can already start to say, right, before I go and see the board, my plan to fix this for the future is as follows. I'm going to bring some external help in. We're going to go through some kind of audit process to really fully understand that what I thought was right is right. We're then going to train those red flags and then have some way of making that stick. I don't know, some ongoing coaching. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And so step 4 then is to self-diagnose the fix. What that then allows the buyer to do on the buyer's journey is to go to the business and go, look, something's gone wrong. I know why it's gone wrong. I know I can't leave it any longer. I need to do something about it. And I know what to do about it. What I really need from you now is the help to be able to go and do that. So I need to get some kind of budget. And so step 5 of the buyer's journey is creating the budget approval phase, or create a case that allows me to go and get some cash. So step 5 is budget case approval. And, in the car world, I've just got to go to my bank account and get some money. I don't really need any more approval from that to go and do it. I've just got to draw some funds out and make sure I've got funds to pay for the mechanic to fix the car. And so step 5 then is creating the budget case approval, which then frees up step 6 in the buyer's journey, which is, now that I've got cash, now that I know what I need to throw that cash at, all I've got to do now is go and find a supplier. So step 6 is buyers go through a self-search process to find the correct supplier. Whether it's a garage or whether it's a sales training or coaching company, I can now go into the marketplace knowing that I've solved all of the steps along the buyer's journey and I've got cash in my back pocket to go and engage. So the sort of 6th step, if you like, is the supplier search phase, where they go online and they Google sales training and coaching or whatever it is that you do. And if you're really lucky, you're on page 1, or if they know of an organization that specializes in what it is that you do, perhaps you've got somebody in your business who's incredibly good at promoting themselves on LinkedIn and has created that kind of key person of influence status. And so therefore immediately you're sort of front of mind when it comes to selecting people like you. And so they reach out and then they come up with a handful of potential suppliers to solve this issue that they've got, and they request a meeting. So step 7 of the buyer's journey is they reach out and they request a meeting from those suppliers that they've just searched for. Now, here's the interesting thing. We're at sort of step 7 of the buyer's journey, and this is the part where people say to me when I say to them, how do your buyers buy, where they say it starts here. It starts with getting a request for a meeting or an inbound or an acceptance of an outbound. But what we've effectively gone through is a good 50, 60% of the buyer's journey already, where, let's be honest about it, it's fair to say that most buyers have kind of made their mind up, other than the fact they've just now got to decide between 1, 2, or 3 different suppliers. If you're really lucky and you've been referred in, you might be the only one. Or if you've really made a case for being that key person of influence, again, you could be the only one, or at least the preferred one of 2, or the preferred one of 3. Irrespective, most buyers at this point have kind of made their mind up on who they want. And so we are actually in a very risky place because basically the decision's kind of been made. And if you're not aware of that as an organization that is looking to increase their sales, and you come in contact with an inbound inquiry from someone you've never met before that looks like the sort of person that would do business with you, my advice to you is to not be too confident. Not yet anyway. Step 7, request for a meeting. Step 8, then they have the meeting with us. Step 9 is some form of sort of negotiation, because in many cases, most clients that I meet with that reach out for me the first time tend to find themselves in a constant state of negotiation, because price tends to dominate the conversation for all sorts of reasons that we help solve when we work with them. But ultimately, there's a negotiation. And then the final step, so step 10, is a decision. And so when we look at it like that, really actually what most organizations are doing is they're engaging with the buyer in the final 30% of the buyer's journey. And that's a really risky place to be.
You're listening to the Sales Cadence Podcast, the only podcast to have a charisma bypass.
And so you get an inbound inquiry. If you're lucky enough and you've done enough hard work and you invest enough time and effort and money in lead generation to create inbound leads for yourself, and you should, by the way, because as much fun as it is to prospect outbound, I think we can all agree that the best place to be is having a flow of inbound leads. But let's just say you've done all of the hard work that has made that possible for yourself, and you get an inbound inquiry, and you book this prospect into a 30-minute call on Teams. You've got 30 minutes, and so there needs to be some kind of way that you can manage yourself and help them in that 30-minute period. And really, I'm going to talk about the sort of key thing really that I share with a lot of my clients, which is about some kind of framework that allows that to be the most effective use of both yours and their time. You show up at minute 1. I refer to the first part of this almost like 6 places. There are 6 places over 30 minutes, 6 destinations that you travel on together, both your buyer and you as the seller. 6 places, destinations. And the first destination is what I call the corridor of uncertainty. It's like those unpredictable first few minutes. Like, for some strange reason, salespeople tend to turn into some sort of gibbering Michael McIntyre, don't they? Sort of bubbling away and super excited and ask you all sorts of random questions about your personality and your home life, and did you watch The Apprentice on Sunday night? All that random bullshit stuff that, for whatever reason, is sort of forced into this almost corridor of uncertainty where the buyer turns up with real apprehension and this concern of risk, knowing that, Christ, is this going to be one of those salespeople that ends up being like Michael McIntyre and talks gibberish about everything to do with personal life and nothing to do with what I want to talk about? Could it well be one of those stereotypical salespeople that I keep reading about on those insane LinkedIn posts? And so that uncertainty exists. And I guess, to be fair, if you put yourself in the salesperson's role, there's some uncertainty on their part as well, which is, what's this buyer going to be like? Are they going to be friends? Are they going to be helpful? Are they going to be engaged? Or are they going to be, just simply on here just to try and waste my time? So whichever way you dress it up, and clearly the purpose at the start of that conversation is to build that rapport, to create that unity, that engagement, almost like find a way of taking our buyer and seller hats off and effectively working together over the next few minutes to try and reach a common outcome. Actually, that's really what we're trying to achieve, this kind of coalition of the willing. But if we're going to do that, then we've got to push past this corridor of uncertainty. So something needs to happen at the beginning, really, that eliminates that uncertainty, or at least, if nothing else, removes that doubt, that concern, that challenge, really. You're then into the next destination, which is what I often refer to as the equality gap. And the equality gap really is something that, crikey, I've had that in my head for probably 20 years. So prior to working for myself in the world of training and coaching, I was a salesperson myself in the corporate space. And, I used to sell packaging for a living, and it meant I was knocking on doors, effectively selling tin cans to anybody that made paint or coatings or inks or anything that looked remotely like the sort of stuff you'd stick on the side of a battleship, a plane, or a house. And as a consequence of that, most of the buyers that I met were very well trained and very, very experienced in the world of procurement. And because they had that experience and been through that training, you do need a form of training to be in procurement these days, then they tended to have the upper hand. And what was created then, and sort of destination number 2, is the equality gap, where effectively they're in control. They probably already know how to solve their problem. They've been through the buyer's journey, as we know, and we spoke about earlier on the podcast. They've diagnosed what the issue is. They've self-diagnosed what the fix is. And as a consequence of that, all they're really looking for is to find a supplier that fits their budget. And so they have this control and they demonstrate it. And that's really a challenging place, whether it's overtly delivered as a way of I'm in control and you're going to do everything I say, or whether the salesperson allows that to happen. You've got to do something to try and level the playing field. So the equality gap needs to be solved. You need to work together as partners. So if you can push past that place, you can find yourself in the third location, which is sadly called the path of most resistance. And actually, it should be the opposite. The path of most resistance is basically the place where the buyer refuses to give up the information that they've already self-diagnosed themselves, that they've come to the conclusion they know what the solution is, and all they're really looking for is someone that fits that solution. It should be the path of least resistance. It should be the place where the buyer is really comfortable answering lots of really insightful questions that are asked by the salesperson. But for whatever reason, the salesperson fails to ask them. And so by just simply defaulting back to what the buyer believes is the solution and saying, yes, we can do that for you, or yes, we can sell you one of those, or yes, our product or service fixes that thing you just described, the challenge that you've got there is if they've self-diagnosed incorrectly, now what you're off to do is you're off to try and fix and solve a problem that probably doesn't exist. Ultimately, what we've got to do is we've got to get to a place where, rather than being in this sort of path of most resistance, where the buyer just shuts down because they just want to find a supplier that solves the problem that they've self-diagnosed, that you politely remind them as the expert that there might be a different way of doing it. If they're open enough to answer some of your insightful questions and they can start to see the evidence that there could be a different way of diagnosing that gives a slightly different solution, which creates a better outcome for them, then I think you find yourself in the path of least resistance, and therefore you're off and the journey continues. The fourth area I think you'll find yourself in a sales call is, I refer to it as the Valley of Plenty. And the Valley of Plenty really is, funny enough, it's never really visited, but it's the place where the buyer gets to be able to free up the opportunity to go out and fix the problem that you help them solve. Because if they haven't got the things that they need to be able to get the solution, and let's go with the obvious things, like a budget, or the ability to get a sign-off from people within the business that are helping them make decisions, if they haven't got access to those funds, those resources in that sort of Valley of Plenty, then they're going to struggle to be able to achieve what they want to achieve, because they're not going to be able to get the solution that they want. And so at some point on that journey, in that 30-minute conversation, you are going to have to talk about those difficult things like price. But it shouldn't be difficult. Now, the weird thing about those sort of 4 areas that we've experience. Not at any point yet. We haven't told them about what it is that we do. We haven't pitched our product or service. We haven't told them about the features and the benefits because we don't need to. Because it's absolutely pointless trying to solve something until you know what you've got to fix. And hence the reason why those sort of 4 areas are quite important, first of all. But we have reached this place now where we do need to explain to them exactly what it is that we do and how we can help them. And I refer to that place as the trip to the promised land. That sort of trip to the promised land, that bit where you explain what it is that you do, of course, is incredibly important and required and necessary. It's just knowing when is the right time to do it. And as important, knowing how to do it. And then the last part, step 6 or place 6, if you like, is what I refer to as the next step. That is the location that you find yourself in at the end of this call. And the next step very rarely ever happens. Most people, in my experience, will rush the last few minutes of a call, normally because they run out of time, typically because they haven't been able to manage the call effectively enough. They don't have some kind of framework that allows them to keep control of the conversation that works for both buyer and seller, by the way. We're not talking about controlling people here. We're talking about controlling the environment that both of you are in. Most salespeople don't have that framework to lean on, and as a consequence of that, the conversation just meanders. And more often than not, you get to sort of 28, 29 minutes and they're about to jump off the call. And really, this is really where the most important conversations take place, because in the next step, you've got to decide what happens next. Because if there isn't a next step, guess what? Nothing will happen next. Or you're into that tedious and costly world of playing follow-up. You've had a great conversation. There seems to be a fit. There's some synergy between the problem or the challenge that they've got and how you solve that for people like them. It all looks great. But if they jump off the call and you haven't agreed, what are we going to do next? Then you waste hours, weeks of your life chasing them. Yeah, so 6 areas to think about when you're on a call. Number 1 is, this corridor of uncertainty. How do I find a way of helping people feel more certain about me in the first few minutes? And there's ways in which you can do that. Number 2, that destination called the equality gap. How do I create an equal level playing field so we're working together as a team rather than this kind of buyer-seller where there appears to be one of us taking the lead and having more say in what goes on. And destination number 3 was the path of most resistance. We need to turn that into the path of least resistance. People enjoy talking about themselves. They enjoy talking about their situation. The only way that happens is when you ask them questions. And so rather than it being the path of least resistance where people shut down because they think that the solution that they've decided is right for them, the one that they diagnose themselves, that's the right one. And therefore, all I'm really looking for from you is to tell me if you can help me with that and tell me what your price is. And really, we've got to flip that. We've got to start to unlock some of the perhaps unknown unknowns that they weren't aware of, bring that to their attention with some fact, with some evidence and some certainty so that they become far more favorable about perhaps looking about solving their problem in a slightly different way. Destination number 4 is the Valley of Plenty. There is some stuff you're going to need to help them get access to allow them to solve the problem that they've got with the solution that you have. If you can do that, then number 5 is the place which is probably the most enjoyable for you as a seller. It's the trip to the promised land. This is where you say, look, I've heard enough. I know what your problem is. I know how I can fix it for you. Let me show how I do that. And all you're simply doing is demonstrating exactly that. And then finally, the final destination in the buyer's journey in this short area of this 30-minute meeting is the next step. Okay, was it a useful conversation? Yes. Do you think there's any value in the two of us continuing the conversation next? Yes. If so, what was the key things that stood out for you? Great. What do you think we should do next then? Do you think it's worth us putting a call in, extending the conversation? And all of those things really come together to effectively create the next step. So look, I don't know if any of that was useful to you, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention because quite a lot of people I meet for the first time think they are at the beginning of the buyer's journey when they receive an inbound inquiry or they get an acceptance to an outbound request for a meeting. And actually the reality is somewhat different. Typically you'll find yourself 65% along the buyer's journey when they reach out to converse with you. So just have that in your mind. And it could well be some of those 6 steps that we talked about at the start of the podcast are going to be areas that you're going to create conversation around through the questions that you ask. How did they come to that diagnosis that this is the solution that they're looking for? Right? What is the impact of fixing it? What happens if you don't? I know sometimes those conversations can be quite difficult and challenging to have, but you do have to have them. The whole purpose of being in sales is you're a business advisor. Right? You've got to identify risk to your potential client, and is there a risk in doing nothing? Because actually, if there isn't a risk, then don't do anything and keep your money in the bank account. They'll have gone through some kind of conversation internally. Okay, ask them questions about that. I mean, if they've got budget, they don't necessarily need to know how much. You just need to know that it's available. And ask them questions about how they went through the supplier search selection. What was the reason behind them picking you? Was it just some random pick off page 1 of Google? Or have you been referred in? Or have they been following you on LinkedIn? Or do they know somebody who's experienced some real value and some upside from working with you in the past, and they want some of that, please? So there's a whole range of different questions that you can ask based on that sort of hidden 50, 60, 70% that you can bring into the visible sort of 20, 30% that you experience when you meet them for the first time. So I hope some of that was useful for you. Having some kind of understanding and awareness around how people buy is really important. And most people that I meet for the first time, when I ask them the question, do you know how buyers buy from you? You kind of heard on this episode that there's a lot that's happened. There's a lot that's gone on before they reach out to you. So just be mindful of that, and maybe you can use some of that to not just help you in your own sales conversations, but you can help give the person that's reached out to have a conversation with you, the prospect or client, you can give them a far more engaging and insightful and fulfilling experience, because you'll be able to ask them questions about things they've already been engaging with. And I think that's got to be a win-win for both of you. Thanks for listening. Look forward to seeing you on the next one.